In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the starter on your Hyundai Sonata. Let's get started. Using a 10mm socket, loosen the negative and positive battery terminals. Remove the negative, then the positive. There should be a 10 or 12mm bolt on the front side of the battery. This should clamp the battery down and hold it in place. Ours is missing, so we're just going to remove the battery. Using a 10mm socket, remove the 2 bolts for the airbox. Remove the airbox. Using a 10mm socket, loosen the clamps on the airbox. There's one more at the throttle body. Using a pair of pliers, pinch the clamp, pull it back, pull the hose off of the valve cover. Do the same thing on this back hose. Pinch the clamp. Pull the hose off the intake. Remove the intake tube off of the throttle body and the airbox and remove it from the car. Using a trim tool, remove the clip on the battery box. Using a 12mm socket, remove the 4 12mm bolts in the bottom of the battery tray. Using a 10mm socket, remove the 2 bolts. Remove the battery tray. Using a 10mm socket, remove the bolt for the coolant hose bracket. Pull the hose backwards. If you'd like to remove the bracket, just push it off of the hose. Remove the connector for the throttle body. There's a push button on either side. Push and remove. Using a 10mm socket, remove the 4 bolts. Remove the bolts. Pull the throttle body straight off. I'm going to tuck it up over here out of the way. Using a 12mm socket, remove the bolt for the coolant hose bracket. Remove the bolt. On the bottom side of the intake, we're going to remove the 4 bolts for this bracket. Using a 12mm socket, remove the 4 bolts. There's 2 on top and 2 on the bottom of the bracket. Remove the 2 12mm bolts at the bottom of the bracket. Pull the boot off of the starter. Using a 13mm, remove the nut off of the starter. Remove the nut. Pull the cable off. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to remove the 2 bolts for the starter. We're going to reach up and pull the starter down. We still have one connector. Push on that, pull back, and remove the connector. Remove the starter. Before installing the new starter, we're going to remove the nut and the crush washer. Install the starter. Install the connector. Push until you hear a click. If you don't hear a click, give it a pull and make sure it's locked on. Install the starter. Push the starter up into place. And we're going to get this bottom bolt started. Install the top bolt for the starter. Snug the bolt down. Torque the starter bolts to 35 foot-pounds. We're going to install our cable onto the stud. Pull the boot back on the cable and install it onto the stud. Install the crush washer and install the nut. Using a 13mm socket or wrench, snug the nut down. Install the boot. Install the 12mm bolt for the cooling hose bracket. Snug the bolt down. Install the bracket up into place. And get the bolt started. Get the two on the bottom started. Snug the bolts down. Using a razor blade or a light abrasive, we're going to go around and scrape all of the corrosion off of the back of the throttle body. Using some brake parts cleaner and a clean rag. Clean the mating surface. I'm going to install one bolt and then line up the throttle body. Get the bolts lined up and started by hand. Snug the bolts down. Torque the throttle body bolts to 8 foot-pounds. Install the connector for the throttle body. Push until you hear a click. If you don't, push on it, make sure it's locked on. Install the battery tray. Get the bolt started on the bottom. With all the bolts started, go around and snug them down. Install the bolts for the airbox that go into the battery tray. Snug them down. Install the plastic connector stay. Install the intake tube onto the throttle body and the airbox. Install the vacuum hose. Grab the clamp, pinch it, pull it back to its original position. Do the same thing on this back hose. Using a 10mm socket, snug down the clamps, one on bottom and one on top. Install the intake piece. Make sure it slides onto the airbox. Install the bolts. Snug them down. Install the bracket for the cooling hose. Install the bolt. Snug it down. We'll install the positive first. Snug the bolt down. Install the negative terminal and snug it down.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.